What if one small decision changed the fate of an empire? Picture this. A man rises from obscurity, carving his path not through noble birth, but through courage, cunning, and sheer determination. He stands at the edge of ultimate power, the throne of Rome within his grasp. The legions are ready, the gates of the capital stand vulnerable, and destiny seems to beckon him forward. Yet in the space of a single hesitation, everything changes. A rival seizes the moment, alliances shift, and the man who might have ruled the known world instead slips into obscurity. His name, once spoken with reverence among soldiers and whispered in fear by his enemies, is nearly erased from history. But what if things had gone differently? What if he had taken that one bold step? Would the empire have entered a new golden age, or would chaos have consumed it from within? This is not the tale of a celebrated emperor whose statues stand tall in marble halls. This is the story of the one who almost was, the forgotten contender who came within a breath of rewriting the history of Rome. His journey from nothing to nearly everything, his web of alliances and betrayals, and the moment that cost him the throne reveal just how fragile power truly is. In the shadows of history, his story lingers like a haunting question. What might have been? Welcome to our channel, Words of Time. In this video, we will dive into the gripping tale of the uncrowned emperor, exploring his rise, the treacherous intrigues that surrounded him, the moment that defined his fate, and the lessons his forgotten story still holds for us today. What if one small decision changed the fate of an empire? History is full of rulers who held crowns, generals who won wars, and visionaries who reshaped nations. But sometimes it is the stories of those who almost reached the heights that prove the most fascinating. These are the people who stood on the edge of power, who had the throne within their grasp, and who, through chance or circumstance, were denied it. Among these near emperors is a figure whose name is rarely remembered, a man who was almost the master of one of the greatest empires in human history. His story is not only about ambition and opportunity, but also about how fragile the line between success and obscurity can be. The man who almost was emperor lived at a time when politics was a constant dance of loyalty, betrayal, and luck. Empires, no matter how mighty, are never stable for long. Behind the glittering halls of palaces and the iron might of armies lay uncertainty. The throne was always coveted, and the path to it was lined with dangers. In such a world, it is no wonder that many stood close to ultimate power without ever truly holding it. This man's tale reveals both the promise and the peril of ambition in an age when the emperor's word meant life or death, and when a single decision could set the course of centuries. To understand how close he came, it is necessary to look at the environment in which he lived. The empire in question was vast, stretching across lands and peoples of many languages and traditions. Its strength rested on discipline, both military and political, but cracks were always present. Succession was rarely simple. Unlike hereditary monarchies where the eldest son inherited without question, imperial transitions often depended on military support, political maneuvering, and the ability to outlast rivals. It was in this uncertain landscape that our forgotten figure rose, carving out influence that brought him to the very edge of supreme authority. He was not born to be emperor. That, in fact, is part of what makes his story so compelling. His early life was marked by service, loyalty, and competence. He was recognized for his abilities, not merely for his bloodline. In a world where power often depended on heritage, he was a man who earned his standing. As he moved upward, his reputation grew, and he became the sort of person others trusted with responsibility. It was through these steps that he found himself entangled in the affairs of succession, poised to claim a prize that few in his position would ever even dream of. The moment came when the empire faced a vacuum. The reigning emperor was gone, and the question of who would replace him loomed large. Power does not linger in emptiness. It demands a new center. Several candidates presented themselves, each backed by factions within the court or the army. Among them was our nearly emperor, a man with strong support and undeniable ability. For a time, his chances seemed bright. He was respected by soldiers, admired by administrators, and seen by many as a safe and capable choice. The empire could have turned to him, and history would remember his reign. But the decision, as always, rested on delicate balances, and in the end, fortune turned against him. The thread that pulled him back was thin indeed. Some say it was hesitation on his part, a failure to seize the moment when it was within his grasp. Others argue it was the betrayal of allies, the sudden withdrawal of support from those who had once cheered his name. Still others suggest that the rival who triumphed simply had more luck, stepping into the right place at the right time. Whatever the truth, the outcome was clear. The throne slipped away, and with it, his place in the pantheon of rulers. Imagine for a moment what might have been had the decision gone the other way. A single nod from the right general, a single day's delay from a rival, a single stroke of timing could have rewritten the fate of the empire. The policies he might have pursued, the wars he might have waged or avoided, the alliances he might have forged. These are the shadows of history that linger in the story of one who almost was. Such speculation is both thrilling and haunting, because it reminds us how fragile history is, how different the world might look if chance had favored another. What makes his tale more poignant is how quickly he faded from view. The man who could have been emperor was not allowed to linger in prominence. To be close to supreme power and fail is dangerous. The victor rarely allows rivals to live comfortably, and sometimes not at all. He was pushed aside, stripped of the authority he had once wielded, and in time his name slipped into obscurity. Those who wrote the chronicles of the empire gave him only brief mention, overshadowed by the one who did claim the throne. It is in these silences of history, where a name is reduced to a footnote, that we find the measure of how close he came. Yet even in obscurity, the story has weight. It speaks to the reality that history is not inevitable. We often look back and see the rise of emperors as though it were foreordained, as though each succession followed a clear and logical path. But in truth, history is fragile. One man's hesitation, one general's choice of allegiance, one crowd's favor can alter the direction of an empire. The man who almost was emperor shows us the thinness of this line more clearly than most. Why do such stories hold our imagination? Perhaps because they remind us of the human side of power. We know emperors as larger-than-life figures, seated on thrones, commanding armies, their names etched in stone. But those who nearly made it reveal the uncertainty, the chance, the vulnerability behind the mask of authority. They show us that even the greatest empires were not machines but living, fragile things, swayed by personalities and decisions. The near emperor is, in this way, more relatable than the actual emperors. He reminds us that history could have gone another way, and that greatness is often determined not only by ability, but by timing. The forgotten man's legacy, though faint, survives in these questions. He did not leave monuments or laws or conquests behind, but he left the haunting idea of what might have been. For historians and storytellers alike, that is enough to make him fascinating. His tale warns us not to take the past as inevitable, and not to forget the countless figures who stood at the threshold of greatness, only to see the door close before them. The empire carried on under the ruler who did succeed, but the shadow of what might have been lingers. Would the empire have been stronger or weaker under the near emperor? Would his rule have brought stability or chaos? Would he be remembered today as one of the greatest or as a failure? We cannot know, and that is both the frustration and the allure of his story. History leaves us with facts, but it also leaves us with mysteries, and the near emperor is one of the most striking of them. The idea of the man who almost was emperor continues to draw us in because it reflects something true about all human endeavor. Success and failure are rarely clear lines. They are decided in moments, in choices, in accidents. The man who stood on the edge of an empire's throne shows us how close anyone can come to greatness, and how swiftly it can slip away. His story may not fill long volumes or grand monuments, but it fills our imagination with questions, and in those questions lies its enduring power. The story of the man who almost was emperor continues to linger in the imagination, not only because of the throne he nearly claimed, but because of the remarkable journey that carried him so close to it. He was not born into luxury or into the kind of lineage that usually produced rulers. In fact, the beginning of his life seemed to mark him out as someone destined to remain in the shadows. He came from modest means, with no ancestral estates, no famous forebears, and no early sign that greatness awaited him. He was, to put it simply, a dark horse in the race for power, and perhaps that is why his rise was so extraordinary. In a world that valued heritage and wealth, he built his path not from privilege, but from determination, skill, and the willingness to seize opportunities that others overlooked. His origins are worth dwelling on, because they help explain why his rise was so surprising to those around him. He grew up far from the gilded palaces of the capital, in a region where life was often harsh and survival demanded resilience. From an early age, he learned the value of discipline and hard work. He had no tutors to teach him the ways of court intrigue, no family wealth to buy him influence, and no expectation that he would one day stand in the company of generals and governors. What he did have was a keen mind, a sharp eye for opportunity, and a restless ambition that would not allow him to remain in obscurity. It was through military service that he first carved a place for himself. For many men of humble birth, the army was one of the few avenues through which they could rise above their station. He entered as a soldier, just another face in the ranks, and endured the long marches, the harsh discipline, and the dangers of battle. Yet he was not content to remain ordinary. He stood out through courage and quick thinking. In the chaos of war, when others faltered, he acted decisively. When commanders sought men they could rely upon, his name was spoken. His bravery won him notice, but it was his ability to inspire those around him that set him apart. Soldiers who fought beside him respected him not only as a warrior, but as a leader in spirit, someone who carried himself with calm authority, even when death loomed close. From the field of battle came his first achievements. He distinguished himself in campaigns that tested the empire's strength on its borders. While others merely obeyed orders, he showed a talent for strategy, suggesting maneuvers that often turned the tide of conflict. Superiors began to take note, and opportunities for advancement followed. He was promoted, not by virtue of noble blood, but by virtue of merit. Each step upward was a small victory over the expectations that had once confined him. What began as the career of a common soldier slowly transformed into that of an officer trusted with command. It was during this time that he forged the alliances that would prove crucial to his rise. Ambition alone could never bring a man of humble origins to the doorstep of the throne. He needed patrons, mentors, and friends in high places. Fortunately, his abilities attracted such people. Among the officers who noticed him was a commander known for valuing competence over birthright. This mentor saw in the young soldier not just bravery, but also potential for greater things. Under his guidance, the young man learned not only the art of war, but also the subtler art of leadership. How to command loyalty, how to negotiate with rivals, and how to project confidence even when uncertainty pressed in on every side. The support of such figures was vital. In the cutthroat world of imperial politics, a man needed allies to survive. Each alliance he formed gave him another foothold, another chance to climb higher. Yet he was careful in how he built these relationships. He knew that blind loyalty could be as dangerous as betrayal, so he cultivated trust with a mixture of respect and prudence. He did not cling desperately to every potential patron, but chose wisely whom to serve and whom to avoid. This ability to navigate relationships with caution and intelligence became one of his defining strengths. As his career advanced, his reputation spread beyond the battlefield. Administrators began to hear his name, spoken as that of a man who combined practical skill with integrity. He was entrusted with responsibilities not only of war, but also of governance. These early successes marked him as someone different from the ordinary officer. He was not simply a sword for hire, but a figure who could manage men, resources, and crises with equal skill. Still, his position was never secure. There were many who resented his rise, seeing him as an upstart who had no right to stand among the elite. Envy and suspicion followed him at every step. Yet he endured, not by challenging his enemies directly, but by proving himself again and again. Each victory, each successful mission, each act of leadership silenced doubts for a time. Those who whispered against him found themselves overshadowed by the weight of his accomplishments. What makes his early rise all the more striking is that it happened at a time when the empire itself was restless. Borders were threatened, factions within the court vied for influence, and the people looked for figures who could bring stability. Into this uncertainty stepped a man whose very existence challenged the old order. He was not born into the world of emperors and senators, but he showed that ability could matter as much as heritage. In doing so, he became a figure around whom others could rally, a symbol of both hope and disruption. His surprising origins and early triumphs made him stand out, but it was his capacity to win belief from others that truly defined his journey. He inspired loyalty not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. Men who had little reason to follow him chose to stand at his side. Mentors who could have dismissed him as unworthy instead risked their reputations on his behalf. Allies who sought stability in uncertain times looked to him as a man who could deliver it. Without these bonds, he would never have advanced so far. With them, he climbed to a position that made the imperial throne seem not only possible but within reach. The rise of this dark horse was not only a matter of ambition and opportunity, it was a matter of timing. The empire was in flux, and he arrived at the right moments to fill the gaps others left open. Where rivals hesitated, he acted. Where others grew complacent, he worked tirelessly. Each step of the way, he combined personal ability with the support of those who believed in him. That mixture proved powerful enough to propel him from obscurity into the very heart of imperial politics. And yet, as close as he came to seizing the crown, his story reminds us that fortune is fickle. He rose far higher than anyone could have predicted from his beginnings, but at the final moment, the thin thread of chance pulled him back. His early life and rise to prominence only make his near miss all the more poignant. He had overcome every obstacle, surpassed every expectation, and proved himself worthy in every test. He had turned from a nobody into a man on the verge of becoming the most powerful figure in the empire. That he came so close, only to be denied, is what makes his tale both tragic and unforgettable. The rise of this dark horse, forged through grit, merit, and the faith of unlikely allies, brought him from obscurity to the threshold of unimaginable power. Yet the higher he climbed, the more dangerous the ground became beneath his feet. For in the heart of the empire, where politics mingled with ambition, the air was thick with suspicion, rivalry, and betrayal. No one who reached for the throne did so unchallenged, and the man who almost was emperor soon found himself caught in a web spun as much by intrigue as by his own ambition. The political landscape of his era was treacherous, defined not only by the throne itself, but by those who surrounded it. The empire's rulers were never truly alone in their authority. Behind every emperor stood generals, senators, governors, courtiers, and factions of wealthy elites, each vying for influence. The army remained the spine of the empire, its legions both a shield and a weapon that could crown or topple a ruler. In practice, this meant that succession often depended less on law or tradition and more on the support of the soldiers. Yet the soldiers themselves were guided by their commanders, and those commanders were rarely of one mind. Every shift of allegiance carried the weight of destiny, and every promise made in the shadows could undo a lifetime of loyalty. Against this backdrop, our nearly emperor had to contend with figures who had been born into the world of power. Some were seasoned generals with decades of service, their reputations forged in foreign wars. Others were members of aristocratic families whose names carried weight even in the absence of merit. Still others were clever courtiers who thrived in the endless dance of flattery and intrigue. To rise among such people was no small feat, but to surpass them and threaten their position was another matter entirely. It was inevitable that resentment grew. To some, he was a reminder that talent could unseat privilege. To others, he was simply another rival to be destroyed before he could become too strong. In this charged environment, alliances mattered as much as armies. He had cultivated trust among his soldiers and won the support of a handful of powerful patrons, but these bonds were constantly tested. A promise today could be broken tomorrow, and loyalty could evaporate at the scent of greater reward. The empire was not short of ambitious men, and betrayal was as common as bread. To survive meant not only watching one's enemies, but also keeping a wary eye on one's friends. The first crucial turning point in his journey came with a betrayal that struck from within his own circle. A fellow officer, once counted as a trusted companion, shifted his allegiance at a decisive moment. Whether out of envy, fear, or the promise of reward from another faction, this man abandoned the cause when it mattered most. What had seemed a secure foundation of support cracked beneath him, and the consequences rippled outward. Soldiers who might have followed him hesitated, uncertain whether their loyalty would place them on the losing side. Rivals seized on this hesitation, painting him as a man who could not even keep the faith of his closest allies. But betrayal did not come only in the form of desertion. In the courts of the empire, whispers carried as much weight as swords. Enemies worked tirelessly to blacken his name, spreading rumors that questioned his intentions. Some claimed he harbored dangerous ambitions beyond his station. Others accused him of plotting in secret against those he had sworn to serve. In a world where perception could mean survival, such rumors were not harmless. They shaped the minds of generals, senators, and even common soldiers, eroding trust in subtle but devastating ways. Still, he pressed forward, refusing to let such schemes destroy him. He fought to maintain alliances, to prove his loyalty, and to show through action that he was worthy of command. Each success on the battlefield pushed back against the tide of suspicion. Each victory in negotiation bought him another measure of breathing space. Yet even as he regained ground, the web of intrigue tightened. For every friend he gained, an enemy lurked in the shadows, waiting for the chance to strike. The second great turning point came not from betrayal, but from a shift in loyalty among those who had once been undecided. In the struggle for succession, there were always those who sought to remain neutral until the outcome became clear. At first, many of these figures leaned toward him, seeing in his rise the promise of stability and competence. But when his rivals began to offer bribes, positions, and promises of power, the tide turned. Men who had spoken in his favor now shifted their support to others, leaving him increasingly isolated. The throne, which had seemed within reach, slipped further away with each defection. It was in this moment of uncertainty that he arrived at the fork in the road, the decision that could have altered everything. He was faced with the chance to act boldly, to press his claim to power with the force of arms, or to hesitate in the hope that further negotiation would secure him the throne without bloodshed. His soldiers, still loyal, urged him to march, to seize what had been nearly promised. The rival claimant was vulnerable, lacking the immediate support of key legions. A swift strike might have secured victory and placed the imperial crown upon his head. Yet here, at the edge of greatness, hesitation took root. Whether out of a sense of caution, a reluctance to plunge the empire into civil war, or simply the belief that fortune would favor patience, he held back. That pause, brief though it was, proved decisive. Rivals used the time to rally support, to bring wavering factions firmly to their side, and to close the gaps in their defenses. The moment of opportunity passed, leaving him weaker than before. In history, there are few things more costly than hesitation at the moment when boldness is required. The fork in the road that he failed to seize is one of the most haunting aspects of his story. Had he acted, had he placed everything on the line in that moment, the empire might have crowned him. His name might be remembered among the emperors rather than among the forgotten. Instead, his decision not to strike left him vulnerable to the same forces that had always threatened his rise: betrayal, shifting loyalties, and the unrelenting pressure of rivals who would not allow him to ascend. What followed was a slow unraveling of the support he had built. Those who had once looked to him as the future now saw him as a man who had missed his chance. Soldiers who had been eager to march for him began to drift away, their confidence eroded. Patrons who had risked their reputations in his favor now sought to protect themselves by aligning with the victor. In the brutal logic of imperial politics, there was little room for those who almost succeeded. And yet, even in defeat, his story resonates. The betrayals that struck him down, the shifting loyalties that eroded his base, and the single hesitation that cost him everything remind us of the precariousness of power. The empire was never a stable stage upon which destiny played out in straight lines. It was a storm, unpredictable and merciless, where one wrong move could erase years of triumph. That he came so close is a testament to his ability, but that he failed is a reminder of how fragile even the greatest ambition can be. The pause at that fork in the road, that single decision not to act when the throne was most vulnerable, proved to be the undoing of the man who almost was emperor. The circumstances of his near ascension have been debated by historians and storytellers alike, but what is clear is that the line between triumph and defeat was as narrow as the blade of a sword. At the moment when he could have seized command with a swift march and crowned himself in the eyes of his soldiers, he chose restraint. Some argue that he was swayed by advisors who counseled patience, promising that negotiations and recognition would secure him the crown without the need for bloodshed. Others suggest that his nature was more cautious than daring, that he feared plunging the empire into civil war and hoped for legitimacy rather than conquest. Whatever the truth, the delay gave his rivals the chance to act. The rival claimant, who only days before had stood in a weaker position, took advantage of this hesitation with ruthless efficiency. He secured the allegiance of wavering commanders by offering titles, wealth, and promises of future influence. He rallied legions that had remained neutral and brought them under his banner. He spread word that the man who had paused was indecisive, that he lacked the strength to lead an empire in crisis. In the brutal theater of Roman politics, hesitation was a sin and boldness was virtue. The image of a man who might have been emperor was reshaped overnight into one of a general who had failed at the final hurdle. What precisely stopped him at the last minute remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Had he given a direct order to march, the city might have opened its gates to him. Had he declared himself emperor in front of his legions, they would almost certainly have raised him on a shield, the ancient sign of imperial acclamation. Instead, he lingered. Perhaps he feared that seizing the throne without formal recognition from the Senate or the ruling elites would brand him a usurper. Perhaps he believed his loyalty to the empire outweighed his own ambition, and that by waiting for legitimacy he would avoid the taint of rebellion. Or perhaps he simply misread the speed with which events were moving around him. In the end, the precise reason matters less than the effect. That moment of indecision was the difference between being remembered in the line of emperors and being relegated to the shadow of history. Once the rival's position solidified, the man who had nearly claimed the throne found himself outmaneuvered. His supporters, seeing the winds shift, abandoned him in growing numbers. Some defected openly, throwing their lot in with the victorious side. Others simply drifted away, unwilling to risk their lives for a cause that now seemed doomed. His army, once loyal, began to fragment. Soldiers who had believed in his star now wondered if their loyalty might bring them nothing but ruin. The momentum that had carried him so high reversed with astonishing speed, and soon he was no longer a contender, but a marked man. The fate of those who almost became emperor was rarely kind. To stand on the threshold of supreme power and fail was to invite suspicion, hatred, and often death. Few rulers were willing to allow a near rival to live freely, lest he return to challenge them again. In his case, the records are divided. Some accounts suggest he was forced into exile, sent far from the capital, and stripped of the authority he once held. Others hint at a quieter end, perhaps a retirement imposed under watchful eyes, where he lived out his days in obscurity, neither honored nor executed but forgotten. There are even darker rumors that he did not survive long after his fall, that assassins were dispatched to ensure that he could never again threaten the man who took the throne. Whatever the exact outcome, one truth is clear. The empire had no place for a man who had come so close to ruling but failed to grasp the crown. The aftermath of his near miss had consequences that rippled far beyond his own life. For the Roman Empire itself, the choice of ruler at that moment was critical. Had he acted and claimed the throne, the course of policy, war, and governance might have been radically different. The man who ultimately became emperor pursued his own path, shaped by his own ambitions and alliances, and the empire followed accordingly. The roads not taken, the battles not fought, the reforms not enacted. All of these haunt the story of the man who almost was. In the immediate term, his failures strengthened the hand of the victor. The rival who secured the throne used the near miss as both a warning and a lesson. He rewarded those who had stood by him, cementing their loyalty with offices and wealth. At the same time, he punished those suspected of wavering, purging potential threats from positions of influence. The empire became a place of tighter control, where hesitation was treated as weakness and loyalty was demanded with uncompromising force. In this way, the near emperor shaped the empire not through action but through absence, his failure serving as the justification for harsher rule. For the soldiers who had once rallied behind him, the consequences were mixed. Some were pardoned and absorbed into the armies of the victor, forced to swear new oaths and forget their former allegiance. Others were dismissed or scattered, their careers destroyed by their loyalty to the wrong man. A few were executed as examples, warnings to others that the empire did not tolerate divided loyalty. The legions, ever the deciding force in Roman politics, were reminded that their power was immense but also perilous, for backing the wrong claimant could lead to ruin. The Senate and political elites also felt the weight of the near miss. Many had hesitated in their support, waiting to see who would emerge victorious, and now scrambled to align themselves with the reigning emperor. Their survival depended on their ability to convince him that their loyalties had never wavered. The memory of how close another had come to seizing power made them cautious, more eager than ever to prove their devotion to the man on the throne. This, too, tightened the emperor's control, for fear bred obedience. The people of the empire, distant from the corridors of power, saw little change at first. To them, the struggle for the throne was another chapter in the endless cycle of ambition and blood that marked imperial succession. Yet the near miss still left its mark. Whispers of the man who might have been emperor lingered in taverns and marketplaces. Stories of his rise from obscurity and his almost triumph carried as both inspiration and warning. He became a symbol of the precariousness of power, a reminder that even the most gifted and ambitious could be undone by a single misstep. In the long sweep of history, the empire moved on, as empires always do. The reign of the victor unfolded according to its own logic, shaped by wars, reforms, and the ambitions of a ruler who had proven his boldness at the decisive moment. Yet the ghost of the man who almost was never fully vanished. His story endured not in marble or law, but in the questions he left behind. What if he had marched that day? What if he had claimed the throne without hesitation? What would the empire have looked like under his rule? These questions linger still, haunting historians and readers centuries later. His near miss and its aftermath reveal much about the nature of power in Rome. Success was not simply a matter of merit or loyalty, or even strength of arms. It was a matter of timing, of boldness, of the ability to act decisively when fortune opened a door. He had all the qualities that could have made him a great ruler: courage, intelligence, the respect of his men, and the ability to rise from obscurity to prominence. What he lacked, in the end, was the ruthless will to act in the decisive moment. That absence proved fatal, not only to his ambition, but to his place in history. The empire is remembered for its great emperors, for the names carved into history by conquest, reform, or cruelty. Yet the story of the man who almost was emperor is no less important. It reminds us that history is not inevitable, that greatness is often lost in the smallest hesitation, and that for every ruler who shaped the world, there were others who came within a breath of doing the same. His legacy is not in what he built, but in the shadow of what might have been, a shadow that still stretches across the imagination of all who hear his tale. The story of the man who almost was emperor fades into silence after his near miss, his name echoing only faintly in the margins of history. The empire moved forward under the rule of the one who seized the throne, and the memory of the rival who had nearly claimed it grew dim. In many ways, this fading was deliberate. The victor had no interest in preserving the story of the man who had nearly taken his crown. To allow his name to linger would have been to invite comparison, to remind the people that another had stood within reach of supreme power. Better to let him vanish, to erase his presence wherever possible, and to present the official narrative as one of inevitability. In this way, the forgotten almost emperor became a victim not only of political defeat, but also of historical silence. The deliberate erasure of rivals was a familiar practice in Rome. Emperors who secured their place often rewrote the record to suit their needs, ensuring that memory itself served their reign. Inscriptions were chiseled away, statues destroyed, names struck from official lists. The man who nearly became emperor suffered from this erasure. His achievements on the battlefield, his reputation for leadership, even the loyalty he inspired in his soldiers were all overshadowed by the need of the reigning emperor to present himself as the rightful and only possible choice. Over time, the traces of the rival dwindled until only fragments remained, scattered in obscure accounts and faint mentions in the writings of those who survived him. But not all of his obscurity was the result of deliberate erasure. Some of it was simply the consequence of his failure. History, by its nature, tends to favor the victors. The rulers who held power left behind monuments, laws, and armies that carried their memory forward. The man who almost was emperor left none of these. His reign, never realized, could not produce the tangible markers that keep names alive across centuries. Without temples dedicated in his honor, without coins stamped with his likeness, without victories celebrated in triumphal arches, he slipped into the shadows. Even if no one had sought to erase him, time itself would have dimmed his story. This forgetting, whether deliberate or accidental, tells us something about the fickle nature of history. We often imagine that history is a faithful record of what happened, but in truth, it is a patchwork of what was preserved, what was deemed worth remembering, and what served the interests of those in power. The man who almost was emperor shows us how easily a life of significance can be reduced to a footnote. His rise was extraordinary, his near miss momentous. Yet because he did not grasp the final prize, his name faded while others lived on. This is not an accident of fate alone, but a reflection of how memory is shaped by power. Yet even in his obscurity, his story carries lessons. The first is about ambition. His life shows us that ambition can carry a man from the humblest of beginnings to the highest circles of power. He rose not through heritage, but through talent, courage, and the ability to inspire loyalty. His journey reminds us that greatness is not always born, but can be made. At the same time, his fall warns us that ambition is never enough. Success demands more than skill. It demands timing, decisiveness, and a willingness to seize opportunity when it appears. Without these, even the most ambitious can stumble at the threshold of triumph. The second lesson is about power itself. In Rome, power was never secure, never guaranteed, and never fully in the hands of one person. It was a web of soldiers, senators, generals, and courtiers, each with their own ambitions and fears. To navigate this world required more than military skill. It required political instinct, the ability to judge when to act and when to hold back, when to trust and when to guard against betrayal. The man who almost was emperor possessed many qualities, but at the crucial moment, he misjudged the demands of power. His hesitation left him vulnerable to rivals who understood that in the struggle for the throne, hesitation was fatal. The third lesson is about history itself. We like to believe that history belongs to the victors, but the truth is more complex. The stories of those who almost were, those who stood on the brink of greatness and fell short, are just as important. They remind us that history is not inevitable. The empire could have taken a different path, one shaped by another man's vision and decisions. The fact that it did not does not make that path any less real as a possibility. His story reminds us to look not only at what happened, but also at what almost happened. For it is in these near misses that we see how fragile and uncertain the past truly was. His legacy, then, is not one of monuments or conquests, but of questions. What would his reign have looked like? Would he have been a stabilizing force, bringing order to a turbulent empire, or would his rule have plunged the state into chaos? Would he have been remembered as one of the great emperors or forgotten as another failed usurper? We cannot know, and that uncertainty is itself his legacy. His life forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the fragility of memory. For those who study history, his story is a reminder that the past is not a fixed narrative, but a collection of choices, accidents, and contingencies. It challenges us to remember that behind every great figure were countless others who might have taken their place. It challenges us to see the losers not as mere footnotes, but as people whose lives mattered, whose ambitions shaped the course of events even if they did not triumph in the end. Perhaps the greatest lesson of his story is about humility. We are quick to praise those who succeed and to forget those who fail, but the line between the two is often so thin as to be invisible. The man who almost was emperor was no less capable or ambitious than the man who ultimately took the throne. What separated them was a moment of hesitation, a choice made in the heat of uncertainty, a twist of fortune. In that truth lies a humbling recognition of how fragile success really is, and how easily history could have unfolded differently. The story of the uncrowned emperor reminds us that history is not just about the victors, but about those who almost were. His life, though erased in many ways, continues to speak through the very fact of his absence. He stands as a symbol of ambition's heights and history's cruelty, of the promise of power and the danger of hesitation. Though his name is largely forgotten, his story endures as a reminder that the past is filled with near misses, and that behind every emperor remembered in glory stands another, erased in silence, who might have been.